Yeah, do it here. Where's the
Good evening. As I said before, my name's Dane Francis Trembath. I'm the Herpetological Technical Officer at the Australian Museum. I'm relatively new to Sydney. I came to one meeting in October of 2019, and then the pox happened, and I haven't been since, unfortunately. But I think, and I think to remember, I'm actually I've been a member of the society for 20 years. I think, as long as I've paid up. Here we go. It all began at this place many, many years ago on Penang Island off the coast of Malaysia. I was quite lucky in that I got to grow up a bit all over the world. My father was a hydroelectrical engineer, and so we lived right across Southeast Asia. This place, which I'll just read out to you, there's the Snake Temple. I don't know if anyone's ever been there, but it's a magnificent place. It was constructed in 1800s to honour a Buddhist monk who lived a long, long time ago for his numerous miracles and good deeds in healing the sick and giving shelter to snakes. Sounds like a good person. Mm-hmm. Apparently, when it was constructed in the 1800s, Wagler's pit vipers reportedly appeared and took over the place. I remember being very scared when I saw all the snakes. They were literally everywhere in the temple. However, I think I was about 6 or 7 at the time. My parents had dragged me to this place. I did not like actually going to temples, but you know, that's what you do. I remember entering these really dark rooms, and you could hear under the tables, and there were all these snakes looking at you. But you get to hold them for a couple of dollars. Now, and of course, and so I've worked out in my life, this appears to be the first snake I ever touched. If people don't know me,
very cute, aren't you?
I'm adorable, yes. I tend not to smile, but I say I'm just starting to have a smile with my dimples. And what a wonderful way to be introduced, to have a Wagler's pit viper handed to you as a child for a photo. Yeah. As I say, as we were living throughout Southeast Asia, and especially in this, I was on my way to Kathmandu, Nepal, because my father was working on a hydroelectric power thing in India. Our way of getting away from Nepal, because in those days Nepal had all dirt roads, there was nothing to eat, and I really liked McDonald's. So my parents would regularly take us to Bangkok, to Thailand, so I could have McDonald's, and so I could see snakes. This is a famous snake farm in the middle of Bangkok, and almost for a couple of dollars, my father would, bribe people to bring out snakes that I could pet. After that, I started really liking snakes, but I was too young to really understand them. In December of 1988, so I would have been 9 years old, my family moved to Cabinjon, Maryland, and I was very lucky to live a short walk from a place called the Lock 8. At the time I was 9 years old. So, just to give you an idea where Cabinjon, Maryland is, so there is the White House. So that was basically Washington DC was right there, and there was also the first museum I ever got to go through, the Smithsonian, which was fantastic. And I remember as a kid the giant bull elephant as you come in, because all museums should have a bull elephant when you enter the door. As you'll see up in the corner, I was lucky to live up at Cabinjon, which I think was 8 miles from the White House. My house at the time was 6406 Wishbone Terrace, as you can see on there, and a short jump across the 8-lane highway there, and I was in the Potomac River, which was basically a reptile wonderland. As I got older, I think when I was about 11, I was allowed to go out by myself and start to explore this place. Potomac River was fantastic. It has very dangerous currents, so you're not supposed to swim. But along the edge of the river was a C&O Canal, which was a goods canal dug in the 1800s to move boats up and down to get them above a thing called Great Falls. Seeing as I had the bug, as I think we all do here, all I wanted to do was get in the mud and enjoy the place. As a young kid, one thing I often used to do, which I was horrified by was they used to drain the canal regularly. This was in the late 80s to 90s. So basically they would drain the canal, pump all the water out and just leave all the fish and turtles to die. I don't know why they did this, and it would really smell. So me and a couple of my friends, because we adored these animals, we would enter the canal, get very muddy, and sort of with bucket brigades go and rescue the turtles and all the fish. And this is how I really got into turtles. The other thing is you could see all the turtles you could never really catch, like that red-bellied turtle. They were really hard to catch. As I got older and older, this bug stuck with me. I sort of went through many phases. The first was my turtle phase, which I sort of broke out of. I'm coming back to. So on the left there, that's the classic common snapping turtle. They were quite easy to find, and you could regularly find big ones and big ones and quite large ones. On the left there is on the right, sorry, that's a wood turtle. Wood turtles are a very neat semi-aquatic turtle that, as I was growing up, this has sort of started getting me interested in these animals, and some that were declining. And I remember the day I got this wood turtle, I swam out to this island, which I probably shouldn't have done, but things you do. I swam out to this island called Plummer's Island, and I waded in, and there was this big pond, and I waded in and I saw this turtle, this red turtle, and I grabbed it, and I thought, oh my God, what is this? So I worked it out. I knew it was a wood turtle, and I remember sitting going, why have I never seen one of these? And now they're actually a seriously endangered species, and I think that is the only record of them for Cabin-John, Maryland. So that was the last one. I actually let it go. I was so excited. I said, oh, this is great, because when you're a kid, you end up keeping everything, but that, I went, oh, this is too good to let that go. The other beautiful thing about the US and growing up in the 90s, if you had long hair and you've got to listen to great 90s rock, as my Kurt Cobain era there. But the other great thing about the US is there's no law about what you keep. Basically, as a kid, I did the classic thing. I had a job at a pet shop called the Animal Hut. It was a very long-running pet shop. And the money I earned was just invested straight back into pets, which I think most of us have done here before. Basically, the US in the early 90s, the mid-90s, was in this massive reptile craze, where just crates of animals were being ripped out of their functional jungles and other places and shipped over to keepers that adored them, but unfortunately probably wasn't the smartest thing at the time. But things started getting bred. And so here's just a picture of me with, on the left with my beloved blood python, and on the right with a Savannah monitor. I remember getting bitten by that really hard. But it didn't actually break my skin because they had sort of roundish teeth. It was kind of like, I was starting to think here, still wasn't. Gradually started doing the classic thing that we all do, catching the problem snakes in the neighbourhood, mostly black rat snakes, northern copperheads, water snakes, ribbon snakes, a whole range of snakes, as we all do. And started learning about them. I even used to measure them, and I even had a little notebook. I don't know why I did that, but I thought that would be a really good idea. And then on the right there was another beloved pet, who's actually still alive, was Snappy, my little baby alligator snapping turtle. I was really, really excited because one guy in Utah or something had bred them, and they'd never been available, so you could actually get one. He's quite large now, of course. Now we get my moving. In early 1998, I moved from Cabin-John, Maryland to Townsville, North Queensland. Now, that would be a massive culture shock for me. Remember, I grew up in Washington, DC. I was used to metros, lines, civilization, shops open after 6, that sort of thing. But the reason why I decided to go to Townsville, which was interesting, is at the time, the company my father worked for said that if your child went to school outside the United States, they would pay for the tuition. And you got an extra allowance to spend on books. And I went, oh, reptile books, that's quite good. So to decide where I wanted to go, I had the Red Cogger at the time that someone had given me, which was a great book. And I picked a bunch of snakes and things I always wanted to catch. I think it was coastal taipan, a northern death adder, a blackhead, all these classic things, and a few turtles. And I sort of put them all together and I looked and I went, where's that? And there was a uni. And I had a look at this uni, and luckily, I did really bad at uni and school and everything else academic. But JCU accepted me, which I was so shocked. So lo and behold, I'm on a plane, I get off in Townsville. I couldn't believe I was there. But the nice thing about Townsville was, I went and lived at this place. It was called St. Paul's College. I was there, they've changed it to St. Catholic College. But the best thing about it was the backyard was Mount Stewart, which is kind of this massive in Townsville. So when I was supposed to be at uni, I decided I wanted to study snakes. This is sort of fond memories of Townsville. So Townsville's open eucalypt savanna, which I tend to live in. So most of all of Townsville is like that, just surrounded acres and acres of pictures. As you climb up through Townsville, up the top there's gullies with rainforest encroaching. And these were really interesting because I started realising that the rainforest snakes, because Townsville's pretty arid, but there was rainforest snakes there. So rainforest snakes is what I used to refer as, where I lived in North Queensland, so rainforest snakes were red bellies, because red bellies weren't around Townsville. So we said, all the rainforest snakes are up here. And we'd find slaties and other things. We started venturing up in here. And the other thing we'd started, and if you went all the way up to the top, you would get into full rainforest. Amazing things about Townsville was, an hour in each direction, you can change your habitat. Really, you can go to the reef, you can go to the desert, you can go to the rainforest, you can go to the open savannah. Just an amazing place. The uni is built in the savannah, and it's full of stuff to look at. The other great thing about Townsville was it was full of snakes. There were literally snakes everywhere. In the US, the snakes are active in summer, and so you go out looking for them in the heat. And this was my first lesson in snakes in Australia. So I ended up being really keen. I went for a walk behind the uni. I got hideously dehydrated because I thought it's hot. There's got to be snakes here. And then luckily, after reading some books, Rick's book, one of the first ones, I realised, wait a minute, all these snakes are in the hot, maybe they're out at night. So I started going out at night and I started playing heaps of snakes. And also with the call-outs. These are some of the common, we had heaps of spotted pythons, heaps of these green tree snakes, which are black. Any beanies are Oswald, tons of coastal carpet pythons. And I was kind of fascinated with them because no two are the same. But here's where it started to get fun. Life objective number one. Get a pet. Now, growing up in the US, you could have all these pets, but I could never get a death adder. I really wanted one. Came here, I came to Australia, came to Townsville, I met some friends. I said, how do you get a death adder? Well, you need a venomous snake license. I said, okay, what have we got to do for that? One of the ticks at those days in Queensland on the venomous snake license said you had to make a contribution to herpetology in Australia. Now, I had no idea what that meant. So I said, how do I do that? I really want to do that. And that was basically my focus for the next couple of months. When I should have been here. Luckily, because I was out looking for animals, I was starting to write down observations, starting to learn about animals. So one night I was out in the town common. Town common is this sort of weird place that used to be a dump for Townsville where you could burn things and do whatever you liked. Now it's a nature reserve that's full of animals. The ranger there was really friendly. I said I was at uni and I was interested in snakes, and he said, I'll leave the gate open for you, just don't take it at night, which I thought was fantastic. So we were going there at night, and I found this goanna, this floodplain monitor, and it was just out right at night, and it was chasing frogs across the road. And I went, what's this out at night? I've seen these before. We're going to put this on. And so I started thinking, why is this goanna at night? Can you be asleep? Might have to look into this. So, this then led to this, which was the first thing I ever wrote. It was probably an atrocious manuscript, and probably Glenn rewrote it, I suspect, at the time. But it set up science to me. Now, I was at uni learning about science, but I had sort of decided that the uni couldn't teach me about science because I was difficult, because I wanted to learn science my way. But this taught me that science was I had to do an introduction, which is literature tribute, I had my observations, and I had my discussion. Basically, I looked into this and I found that, all these other goannas were out at night, and in areas where it's warm, this was common. but it had never been reported. So I put that in. I remember getting this back in the mail and being really excited because I couldn't believe I'd actually written something. And then, but the best part was, I got a permit, I got the death adder. Now, this of course, being eccentric, led to a friend to the death adder. So that was that was a glorious, like, the death adder. So I got this nice red Sydney adder for a friend. And then I got a Stevens banded snake, that was a real favourite. And also I got a massive mulga from the NT. But this was sort of, I was keeping lots of snakes, but I was keeping them because I didn't actually know you could study them. Sort of like, I'll keep them and I'll kind of learn about them. Life objective number 2, become a herpetologist. That's what I thought would be a good idea. How do I do that? I really want to be a herpetologist. Well, I think a lot of us have had that thought when you're young. You really have no idea what to do. I, as a kid, used to go and read books in the library and go, okay, this is what you do, you write books, you can do studies. But it was then I really started thinking, no, like, if you really want to be a herpetologist, you've got to write papers, you've got to learn. You actually got to learn about science, which I like science, but I actually didn't know what science was. Like, what it's still like. That's where I got to the man there. And I remember I had this book with a green python. It was a great book, and it had an old belly python, all silver, and I was like, oh, it's fantastic. And I went there very shined by study snakes. So I read his book again, and all his papers, which there weren't as many at that time, so it was doable. I'll be able to work it out, because I already know how to catch snakes. And I remember the first paper I read was this death adder we talked about. Now, the only reason I read this paper is because I wanted to know how big do adders get. Because that's the standard reason you read these papers. But then I started looking at this paper and I looked at these graphs and I went, I think I can actually work out how to do all this. And I was slowly failing and passing some uni and learning, so it was going well. At the same time, which was really great, I met this guy who was totally insane, eccentric, but a major mentor to me. And his name was Simon Fern. Simon was probably what I've been looking for a long time, was someone a bit older than me, who knew a lot about snakes, but kind of suffered from the same thing I did, kind of wanted to be a herpetologist, didn't really know how to do it, but Simon knew how to catch snakes. The other thing Simon taught me was there was no reason to ever catch Simon said there's only 2 reasons to catch a snake. 1, you catch a snake, you weigh and measure it, you figure out you let go. Or 2, you give it to the museum. He said there's no other reason to catch snakes. He said why risk your life to let something go and not get any data on it? And that sort of really clicked with me. And so Simon said, do you want to study snakes with me? And I said, yes. So Simon said, whatever snake you catch, just bag it up. And Simon's living on Magnetic Island, and once a week he'd come to my room and we would weigh and measure snakes in the hallway at the college. Simon was also massively into beetles and moths and all sorts of stuff. And then on the right is a great photo from later. It's one of my favourite photos. That was when me and Simon went into Tully Gorge and did some work on scrub pythons that we actually wrote up with Simon. But yeah, really good influence on my life. At the time when I first went with Simon said, I'm studying scrubbies and jungles. I said, okay, that sounds good. I like both those. That was preceded by a 5-day field trip where we would snake up at Tully Gorge all night. And I couldn't believe this. I've never done anything like this before. So Simon would, at 5 o'clock, we would go and we would have some sort of disgusting food at the service stations. There was nothing to eat at Tully. And then we would then just snake all night while Simon chain smoked and told me all about papers and many about licks. Simon used to always say, you need to read this one, you need to check that sample size, you need to check that sample size. So we did this for 5 days. We caught 100 snakes in 5 days. And we were just exhausted, and we would go all night, so we'd start at night and you would see that there were these pulses of snakes. And that's when I started realising, wait a minute, there's actually patterns here, like there's something. And it would rain, and then all the jungles would come out. And that was where I really started thinking, oh, there's actually something with it. And while reading all the papers at the time, I went, oh yeah, this is something we can do. And there are other reasons Simon studied scrub pythons, because he wanted to find a really big one, so it always comes back to that. The other 2 things Simon told me, because he was a massive book collector, and he looked at my pitiful book collection and he said, you're missing 2 books. And I said, really? And he said, you're missing Song of the Sun, by Eric Waller, and he said, "You're missing Biology and Evolution of Australian Snakes by Greer." I had neither of these books at the time. I got them, and I really liked them. Worrell's book was fantastic, which was full of stories. And me and Simon actually got to live one of the stories. We remember reading the pythons in the gorge, and it clicked, and we went, "That's only up the road." So we got in the car, drove up, ascended the gorge, not Barron Gorge where they went, I don't know how they got in there. We went down Tullywood, we couldn't believe it, there were scrubbies everywhere. And so we weighed and measured them all, and there were red bellies, and there were jungles out basking and everything. And then the other book was Greer. Greer was kind of the book I was looking for because it had all the references in the back. Remember, in these days, much like when we were talking at Rick's talk, I think Glenn was talking about that, is, these days you can find references at the click of a button, not that I know how. But Greer's book had all these references, especially in this obscure journal called Herpetological, and I went, "Oh, I need to get some of those." And I'm still collecting those. But yeah, it was a really great book, and that would sort of start, if you ever wanted to, when we would write herpetofauna papers, I wrote a lot of herpetofauna papers because they would publish it. I would always start with that book. It's just to start the link with it. So, at this time, me and Simon decided it was time to catch and study snakes. Interestingly, that's the one snake I never caught, coastal type, and of course I missed out on that fun. But a friend of mine caught that, and we got to weigh and measure it. And then when I released it, it almost killed me. But yeah, it was a beautiful animal. Love to do work on them, but very scary. But yeah, this was the classic, back behind Townsville, taking photos of snakes, weighing, measuring them, and releasing them. I guess the main thing to all this was that, not that I cared at the time, but Simon actually had a permit to do all this, which of course I had no idea even existed, and had animal ethics approval and all that. That was sort of beyond my humble brain in these young days. The other thing I got taught, and I started working this out, was a good snake is a dead snake. The classic thing you say when you enter a country pub or talking to some people on mine sites where I've done a lot of work. A good snake is a dead snake. Well, one thing we realised very fast is that good dead snakes, you can actually get a whole lot more data from. And so we would go out on these massive snaking trips, and that's just like normal Townsville dead snakes. There's a few Brisbane things in there, there's a roughy and stuff, but we would find bucket loads of dead snakes. Now these would all get frozen, taken back to my apartment or wherever we were staying, thawed, dissected, looked at, and then coiled up, thrown in a drum of ethanol because I didn't know how to fix it in there, and then I'd ship them to the Queensland Museum because I thought that's what you did. But we started to realise that, and then we had this sort of change, you go snaking, and I see it all the time in all the Facebook forums, it's like people are so excited they found a snake. Well, we started getting really excited about, a snake, and it's already dead. Fantastic. Now we can actually do something. Number one, we can take it as a specimen, but we can sort of learn about it. The main thing was the insides. So yeah, that was just a little standard. Now this just continued. I'm pretty sure I was going through my notes. I think that was like a night in Townsville of dead snakes I found one night out. Literally the tropics, if you've ever been up to the tropics, some nights, the roadkill is phenomenal. And the snakes just keep coming in there. It's amazing. There just must be so many snakes. Like when I first went to Folgammon, there were still water bodies. It was just crazy. We just smashed ones all over the road. Frogs. But yeah, this became what I just got into. I really enjoyed doing it. It was great. I learned a lot about these animals. I read a lot. Still don't really know what scientist was, but it was, I was doing science. It was fun. But I started writing later. Now, one thing my stats course, I failed the first time, I passed the second one. As you do, I didn't understand it, but once I actually wrote a paper, I then went back and I did really well at it because I actually understood what I was doing. And I think that's a problem with stats courses today, not that I was taught one, or maybe Chris has taught one, I don't know. But I think the problem is if you don't actually understand what you're doing, or if the example is really boring, like ours was, tree height. Like I just didn't care about trees. But boigas, I really cared about boigas. And so basically this is one of the first ones we wrote, and I was quite happy because in a 7-year period we caught 265 boigas in North Queensland. And we wrote it up, and it was just a nice little paper. And then that was followed by more. another paper on black whip snakes. At the time, like Rick had done a massive attack of whip snakes, but at the time when he had done it, the black whips were comprised of 2 species, which then Glenn worked out. So that gave us that little niche to go, well, we can get lots of these lesser black whip snakes for Stygiata, so we can write a paper, which is quite good. And the other thing about this paper, it taught me that everyone needs to learn is that venomous snakes are actually venomous. I got bitten by one of these, and it was really bad. I was very sick for a couple of days, because when you're young playing with snakes, you go, oh, these aren't actually venomous, but they actually are. This was followed by another famous to me, but great paper. This is probably one of my favourite papers that I wrote on these slates. I loved slaty greys, they were absolutely my favourite snake. They have the best attitude of any snake. They basically are unfriendly. The other thing is they eat anything. And we used to find these weird things. I remember one thing that we wrote this in the paper, that we would catch these giant slaties, and on the side would be these bite marks where like the ribs had been broken and crushed in. And I remember one day, Simon's going, I wonder what does this? Like something does this. And I remember we caught, that day I think we caught a major skink off the side of the road, and Simon went, I reckon this is what bites them. Yeah? And then in our paper, once we actually cut them open, we found a common prey item was the tail of a major skink. And so that's what we thought. We went, okay, that's probably what's happened. And then last, another one on common tree snakes, which were really common, amazing, just an amazing colubrid. Townsville, like all the tropics, are just full of colubrids. It just never ends. But yeah, this was sort of learning, it was great. The other thing I was always fascinated with, which I still am, but I'm kind of getting more back into, had some hiatus, is turtles. Growing up in the US, if you're not into turtles, even the academics, they mostly just study turtles. If you're not into turtles, you sort of don't have a choice. Whereas in Australia, turtles are this rare thing that only certain special people like and study, which I, in the esteemed Edinburgh Thesis Society, how important is that? One thing we had in Townsville, which, here's the video, was, I remember I went down and had a look, and at Townsville, they've got this Ross River, goes all the way through, and it's impounded. There's weirs to stop the saltwater coming up and the saltwater crops. And people used to feed all the turtles off there. There you go, throwing in some bread. Yeah. People used to throw this bread off there. And I remember looking over and going, my finger was there with someone, there's 1,000 turtles there. Someone said, why doesn't someone study this? And then when it clicked, I went, I could do that. Now at the time I was at uni, and there was a lady there named Di Barton, who was a parasitologist who I really admired. It was a really nice lady. She was probably more, she was a few years older than us. She tended to, she coached the rugby club. She came to the club or pubs and all. She was just the best lecturer. And unlike a lot of lecturers, she actually knew how to teach people, which I learned. So I came up to me and said, hey, would you be interested in doing a 6 credit point independent research project? And I said, okay, that sounds good. And she said, do you want to, maybe we could do it on the freshwater turtles at the Ross River. And I said, okay. And so Di said, do you know much about market capture? And I said, no, but I'm willing to learn. So I started to do a little review, and I read about Julie Seaver, market capture, and all this stuff. And I went, okay, I can work this out. So I then started marking turtles. The best thing about these turtles are really easy to capture. You could capture hundreds if you wanted to. We would catch them, we would notch their shells in all different ways, and then we would release them. And then I started getting them back, because I only lived out the front. Just more turtle madness. And so basically, I started this study, and I was looking at these 3 species. So crest river turtle, which is my favourite, the sawshell turtles. They weren't as common, and the can snake necks, the long necks around Townsville. In the Ross River, it was mostly crest river turtles, and the other 2 were they were quite uncommon. You just never found them. They were alive there. The crest river turtles, there were literally thousands of them. And so I wanted to look into this, and basically I found that the density of these crest river turtles was like 3,000 to 5,000 per hectare of river. So like a biomass that you couldn't ever imagine of turtles. And then to add to that, I then actually started. So I did this. I did the class. I actually got a distinction. One of the few distinctions I got. Herpetology class, I got a distinction. Independent research project, got a distinction. Then after that, I decided that I JCU, I like JCU, but I got offered a master's at the University of Canberra with Arthur Georges because I went, well, he's into turtles. So he took me on as a master's student. That was quite good. This was one of the study sites. This was another one, and basically what I looked at was the impacts of weirs on freshwater turtles. And so I found that weirs were basically influencing this thing which I called superabundance, whereas it changed the entire population structure. So the weirs stopped the movement of saltwater up, so that there were no saltwater crocodiles. So one of the major predators of the crocodile did not exist. They were gone. Because everyone was feeding these turtles, there was also the vegetation in the river totally changed. And so the turtles' diet completely changed. And in doing that, the females would have 3 to 5 clutches a year. Whereas in Alligator Creek, which is that spot, the females would clutch once a year. And they ate windfall fruit. So when we were stomach flushing them, Ross River ones and stomach flushing, they were just vomiting up bread and chicken wings and KFC and everything else that got thrown in. But here they were just coming out like leaves. And so basically it was just this unproductive environment. So that was kind of neat. Later in, I kind of got interested. I liked turtles, and because I was Arthur's student, I said, why don't you go collect tissue samples? That's a great idea. So I said, okay. So I took all my friends and we went up. And someone had told me there's a white-headed Alsayer in Johnson River. And I went, okay. So we went up to the Johnson River. Now, Johnson River has crocodiles, and there's most of them in the But those days, I had this rule where if you're up in the rainforest and it's cold, they might not be there. So we found this massive plunge pool, and we started diving. And I remember we dove down the bottom of the pool, and there were these logs like this, and they were fully waterlogged. And so as you swam through them, they moved, which terrified me, because I thought, I'm going to get crushed under a log. That'll be the end of my career. No one remembered me. But these turtles were there. There were these giant Johnson River turtles who were walking along the bottom. Now the water was really cold. And the other thing I noticed was when they were eating, I dove down once, and there was just a female eating sand. Sort of whooshing around the sand. What are they eating? Nothing. So we did a little bit of a market capture thing there, and we found we caught some little juveniles, and then we came back a year later and they'd grown 1 millimetre. Which made me realise that big Johnson River turtle, it must be 1,000 years old. Like no one would know. And that it just eats algae and sand. But it's just more interesting fun. So that was Townsville. While I'd been in Townsville, in my quest to look at snakes, I have to go see all the classic snake things. I went to Darwin, had to go to Fogdam, had to go over there. But while I was in Darwin, I went to buy some snakes off some Darwin snake guys. And they said, you should go to this place called Dorat Road. It's got way more snakes. So I went down there, I had to drive down there, I went six of the mulgars, all the browns, and tons of ants. So I decided at that stage, because I was writing up this master's, and I thought, maybe it's time to move. At Townsville, I thought I'd seen all the snakes here, and all my friends were getting jobs. And I thought, no, I'm going to move to Darwin. And it was pretty cheap to live in Darwin. Late 2005, I loaded up my car, my Toyota Echo at the time, with all my stuff. I actually sold all my snakes, so pretty sad. But at this time, I was like, no, I don't even need pet snakes. I'll have a few jars. And I moved to the Northern Territory, which was fantastic. The Northern Territory was just basically Townsville hotter. More rain, lots of life, amazing floodplains. It was just this wild place. And it was relatively undisturbed by people. You could go places. I remember I went down the Daily River for a week, and I saw no one. There was no one there. If I'd have got lost, I just would have never been found. This is fantastic. After growing up in Washington, D.C., amazing gorges, and open that one with Den Harbours. But the main thing that I had found in Darwin was there was a natural history museum. And they were silly enough to encourage me to come in there. Now, I loved this, because I'd always liked museums. I used to go to Queensland Museum to visit. Talk to Jeanette when she was there. And basically I went in there and I said, can I look through the mulga drum? And Paul Horner, the curator at the time, said, of course you can, just book a time. You go and look, and I looked in there, and down the bottom was this massive mulga. So that's a 9 foot 3 inch mulga snake. There was a bigger captive one that some guy sent me a photo of, but that's an actual specimen, which we're going to talk about soon. So when we talk about giant snakes, I like specimens, because then we can put a tape measure on it. But yeah, that's how it is. The Antique Museum was fantastic. The other thing was they didn't get many visitors. So Paul Horner said in his entire 30 years there, he said, you're one of the few people that's ever rocked up here that actually just wants to look at snakes and volunteer and do some stuff. Now at the time I didn't have a job. I was sort of living off some money I had. But Paul encouraged me. He said, well, we can employ you here. So that's what they did. And that was how I met these people. So on the left, that's Paul Horner, a younger Paul Horner. I only knew the older Paul Horner. And my other great friend on the right, it was Jared Archibald, who's now the curator of territory history. Paul is a walking encyclopedia of reptiles, like most museum curators and research associates are. He knew how to tell apart everything. He was obsessed with cryptoglyphus, these tiny skinks, which I have nightmares about the amounts that I had to look at when I worked for him. So Paul was excellent, very wise, very helpful. The other thing Paul said is just, he said, here's a museum permit. If you want to collect reptiles, go for it. He said, you can't go in Capua, but you can go in all the other places. So he said, if you're going to be out, collect some reptiles. So Jared was an amazing guy. He's still up there. He was into natural history, but an amazing naturalist. His father actually did the mounting of Sweetheart the crocodile. And Jared told me stories about they ate Sweetheart crocodile's kids, and it was terrible. So it's really disgusting. But he remembers them, Paul Warner and his dad, and I think 8 other men dragging Sweetheart the crocodile up the steps of the old museum. But Jared was great. The other thing they had in these days was there was a car and we could just go out. Darwin was amazing. I got back into frogs. Even though I was in North Queensland playing with frogs, I didn't really care about frogs. And just to give you an idea, like most of these frogs would be 12 minutes from the middle of Darwin. And the rocket frogs were just in some skunky drain up into my street. But yeah, I sort of just started really getting into frogs. Especially at the same time, there was starting to be a lot of work done on frogs. So yeah, frogs again. But the main thing I loved, as everyone here, was Darwin had lots of snakes. They were kind of the same snakes, but slightly different. Like, carpet pythons were pretty, they didn't grow as big. Lots of adders there in those days. Lots of olives, and lots of northern brown snakes in those days. So I started getting into all these snakes. The other thing that I started enjoying myself was turtles. So basically, because I was still part of University of Canberra and still was, there was massive turtle work going on in the Dane River, which I sort of schemed my way along. And that was quite a lot of fun because Dane River was the greatest research freshwater turtles in Australia. And you could find most of them on a day, but some were really hard to find. Amazing thing. I put this just in there for you, Glenn, because I knew you'd complain if there wasn't enough skinks. It was Darwin. I actually started caring about skinks. It sort of sounds like a lot of interesting skinks. But Darwin started really actually going, no, skinks are quite interesting. And also with Paul Horner's continual teachings that skinks are better than snakes, which I argue. It's a slip, but that's enough. But yeah, it's a great array of skinks. But this was probably the main thing that I loved in Darwin. So, not far from where I was, it's 2.5 hours if you get to Pig-nosed turtles. The road was good. I could drive my Toyota Echo to there till I got full drive. Pig-nosed turtles were just fantastic. Like, as a turtle nerd in the US, they're just the ultimate holy grail of all the turtles. And there were people there studying them, so I just used to go along and help catch them and enjoy them. And in those days, we could snorkel for them, where you would never snorkel ever in the Dane River looking for them. And I remember looking in Cam's book and he had photos of his kids, holding them at these places we would never ever snorkel for them. But we used to snorkel for them quite regularly till it all changed. I remember one day going up the river, and we looked out to the right and went, oh, there's a saltwater crocodile. Where has that been? So we said, what's going on? And basically what was happening was the saltwater crocodiles, because they stopped shooting them, at least that day, they were just slowly coming back to where they all lived. There were massive freshies. And the other thing that scared the hell out of us, we found a freshie bitten in half, like a big king freshie. Moving on. So during my time in Darwin, I worked for the Museum of Herpetology on a range of contracts. Unfortunately, museums are terribly funded and staffed, and there was no job for me in the end. This sort of put me on that sort of wondering, well, what am I going to do? You know, I said, I can't get a job at the museum. I'm not the greatest academic. Around the same time, a friend of mine called up and said, do you want to go to the Pilbara and catch lizards on a mine site for $1,000 a day? And I said, yeah, that sounds great. So I went and did that, and basically I got in this whole world of environmental consulting. That was quite interesting. It exposed me to a whole new science, the science of impact assessment, and why you do surveys and why you don't. The other great thing about it is that mines are in really cool areas, and so you get to go all over the place. I worked for a consultancy called Ecos in Darwin. I went in there one day and had my CV, and they gave me a job on the spot, which was nice. And then they had me going all over the place. Like I went throughout Arnhem Land, Tiwi Islands, just amazing places, doing sort of impact assessment. Did that for a while, sort of continually got, was getting a bit older, legs were starting to ache a bit, I was sick of digging pitfall traps. So I got this job. I remember looking, I said, I just want a government job, like just a permanent government job. And so I saw this job as a mining regulator, and I went, well, yeah, I could probably do that. Yeah. So I got this job, and they interviewed me, and I moved into the mine department, and I realised that I was the only person in the mine department that knew anything about threatened fauna, which was good and bad, because you probably don't want a mining assessor that actually knows about threatened fauna. But I worked there for 4 years, and over time I was put into a group that worked on sand and gravel, because I had a lot of experience with Urolia Davies, which is a Davies toad which only lives on sand. So that was the idea. I did that for a while. It was a good job, but I kind of still had this inklings that I wanted to work in a natural history museum. In late 2019, I moved from Darwin to Northern Territory, Darwin, Northern Territory, Sydney, where I just offered a technical officer position in the Australian Museum Herpetology Department. That was sort of, probably career-wise, like I went from being a senior mining officer with staff and all responsibility, but I kind of just wanted to get back to jars and sort of actually being a herpetologist. On my way though, I thought I'd drive through Townsville. I thought I'd drop in on some old Shell friends. So I went to Townsville. I went back to one of my study sites because a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, Jay Schaefer, another herpetologist, he told me, he said, your turtles are still here. And I went, really? And so that was 2003, 2019. I went, where are they? And he said, go down the weir and have a look. And I looked over, and there was a notched turtle just sitting there. And I went, oh, you beauty. So I ran in and I grabbed it. And I looked up its notching case. You can see the notches there, and you can see the face where they healed. Now the back notch, what's happened there is it's broken off, which happens, but what I was able to was on the carapace. So all the carapace sutures are distinct, which is another reason why they're a terrible descriptor for turtle taxonomy. We won't talk about that tonight, because they vary widely, carapace and plastic. So I had a look at it, and I worked out this was an animal. So, it'll easily live from 2003 to 2019. And when I caught it, it was an adult. So these animals live a long time, but we don't know. Now I'll get to my current bit of my talk, which is about just a quick bit about the Australian Museum Herpetology Department. So that's water. So, here's from the website. The overall vision of the Australian Museum is to be the leading voice for the richness of life, the earth and culture in Australia and the Pacific. So that's our overarching theme. To do this, the Australian Herpetology aims to increase the impact of science at the Australian Museum. So the Australian Museum conducts lots of science, we support science, we believe in science. My job, though, is to undertake the technical work to support the real scientist, Dr. Jodie Rowley, a great friend of mine. So my main role there is to help manage the collections, which we're going to talk about tonight. In order to increase this impact of science, we also conduct research into the taxonomy and ecology of Australian reptile frogs. So recently, Australian Museum this year has described a new Delma, which just made the paper today, and they've described also a range of frogs, and there's also a ton of research on in the background happening. We provide advice on the, for a spelling mistake, that's good. We provide advice on the taxonomy and ecology of Australian reptile frogs to the public and government. This takes up a huge amount of our time, but we like doing it. Some is quite easy. What snake is this? Some is, what is the impact of this mining site on that thing? Or, how did this turtle die? Stuff like that. The other thing we do, which my friend there on the left, is we facilitate research by hosting visitors to the collections, and in some circumstances we loan specimens to other institutions. So we will, at some stages, we'll actually pack up specimens to send to other institutions within reason, because these specimens are an invaluable resource. And there's a nice photo of me on the right. That's me teaching a herpetology lecture during the second lockdown, because I was allowed to actually go to the museum because I said, well, I need a snake to look at. So. As I said, to do all this is a huge amount of work when you have to manage a collection of over 200,000 items. Our estimate is we have 200,000 items. We actually don't know. It keeps growing. Really not a great idea. There is more specimens in the collection than is in the database, as we're finding. And it seems to be the oldest specimens, some have never been databased. So for instance, not too long ago, we were digging around the spirit house as we do, and I found an ulm, a European blind cave salamander, and I started looking into it and talking to Glenn a bit about the history of the museum, and I worked out that it was from 1861. And we found an ad in the Sydney Morning Herald of the list at the time. And I went, well, that's sat here and no one ever registered it. So we registered it. So now it's at least we have it, we know we have it, it's available for science. Someone might want to study an ulm from the 1860s. As I said, the Australian Museum contains specimens of most known Australian species of Australian species of amphibian and reptile. Although constantly growing, the size of the collection is estimated at 200,000 specimens. We also have 700 primary type specimens. We probably have more. We're sort of in the midst of finding them. So the primary types are your holotypes, your main types, your neotypes. These are basically what the description of the species is based on, the species they put forth to say this is the name attached. As for some people have asked, so we have new ones and we have really old ones. So I put up on my Facebook, and I think I put up a photo. I've got the holotype pig-nosed turtle from 1863 or something. Kind of amazing stuff. But yeah, it really is about history. This is just a quick picture off the website. This is the office. This is half my office. Most 99% of the reptile collection is spirit preserved, so preserved, fixed as we call it, in ethanol or formalin, and then preserved in 70% ethanol. When you walk through the spirit house, which I do every day, I had to get 1 million buckets for Rick today, up and down, you get an idea of the time and effort it took to collect all this, register it, and identify it. And we still have jars of things that we haven't really looked at. And it also teaches me about how all the people that I idolise, these museum people and stuff, this is why they know so much about reptiles, is because they can just go into the basement and find all this stuff. Because when I first looked at these collections, I went, okay, that's how Hal Cogger wrote Cogger, because you could just go down and just sort of start your thinking. We also have this area, which this was my first job at the museum, was to rehouse the tank stores. The tank stores were all the big specimens we kept. There's tens of thousands of litres of ethanol in there. This used to be in plastic vats that leaked, which is not good. So my first contract there was to replace them all with stainless steel and to move all the specimens. And while we were doing that, we found we had a king cobra that I didn't know about. And we're sort of working on it. Glenn has advised that it's possibly one of Worrell's king cobras. That's our only main guess we have at the time. But we don't know. But it's a beautiful specimen. It's well preserved. I've asked Hal, he doesn't seem to remember it, and Ross, the breed special man, doesn't seem to remember it too, but I guess we have so much stuff to remember.
How's that one preserved?
That's a wet preserve, yeah. So we've just pulled it out to take a photo. So, The other thing, and this is what we get to do less and less, and as I said, when we've been very good and done all the paperwork, we sometimes go on expeditions. This is probably the best part of these sort of jobs, all the interesting people we get to meet. This is some of my expedition work in the Northern Territory. One great thing about the Northern Territory is that most of your expedition work is by helicopter because there's no roads. And I remember flying over this creek, actually a river, and someone said there's a huge turtle in there with a white head, and I said, get the helicopter to land right there. And I've never been in a helicopter before, and the helicopter pilots there, because they're NT helicopter pilots, he went, no worries, down one skid on there. He said, and he just hovered. He said, get out. He said, cut down those 5 trees, or I won't come pick you up. And I said, okay, cut down the trees. And I actually caught a massive dead target, which was good. And the other thing is you get to eat interesting food. I don't know what I'm cooking there, but yeah, it looks fierce. The other thing about helicopter work is when you see the helicopter come to get you is the best day of your life. Because when you've been dumped on a rock overnight with crappy rice and beans or whatever you're eating, it's painful. So on our last trip, when me and Jodie went to Greenland, amazing place, show a photo, we had the worst night ever. It was really warm, which is fun. We just couldn't sleep, we were just like sweating, just in these little tents. And I remember we got up in the morning and Jodie said, you don't need to sleep? And I said, no. I said, I'm just so dehydrated. And then you just sit there waiting, go, where's the sound, where's the sound? And you go, oh. So when it comes to get you, is the best part. And when it lands. The other great thing about this helicopter work is you can just fly across the land. Take you weeks to walk in there and basically find the water. Because we're looking for, most of the reptiles in here are basically concentrated on the water. Frogs definitely. This is a question people often ask that I thought we can go through. Is where do all the specimens come from? So I've got 200,000 reptiles. How did we get them all? We collect some. Under permit and under an animal ethics approval. We don't collect probably as much as we used to in the sort of golden days of collecting. It's more targeted now. But a large amount of the specimens we get now are roadkills because they're just a waste of a snake, as I say. Snake should be off swimming. Now that's quite a neat slide. I think that was Matt Greenlee's. That was his last deposit at the museum. He found those on one of his study sites. He said that was like 2 nights. So you have a look at that and go, well, that's just all a waste. So we'll take these things and we'll talk about that. And I've got some examples of how people in this club are helping the Australian Museum. Okay? Classic. So Phil, where is he? Somewhere out there. There he is. I like Phil. Phil works for us. He's a frog ID validator. I don't know how they do that all that long, but Phil does it too. Wasted it too. Bill sends me this photo, which I love. It just says, I found a dead adder. It's a big red one. And I said, fantastic, what was it? So Phil, I think he went to do a call out and he got hit by a car. So I said, bring it in. So we brought it in. We were able to fix it, preserve it. And so we got this beautiful specimen of a red death adder. Not only that did we get the death adder, but we also got tissues on it. So a big death adder, and that'll get multiple tissue samples. So that specimen has now gone from being a sad sight to an actual museum specimen, which the next Rick Shine might want to redo the adder paper and go car. Because that snake, it's just data. And this is the thing I learned in my foray into being a snake biologist about data. It's just there. And as someone that's done life collecting, I don't particularly like collecting and euthanizing reptiles. I don't really like reptiles, but any salvage of reptiles I get, I fully support because I don't want to go knocking off adders all that long. Here's my second example. Okay, Andrew, where's he? Back to back there. Before I moved here, I remember on Facebook, because Facebook has become this world of dead snakes. So I spend a lot of time on Facebook looking for specimens because that's my job. And this adder, there was this photo of these guys. And I know that's a tiger snake. And lo and behold, Andrew was driving near his house and he finds the biggest verified death adder ever, other than the 1.3 metre, but still waiting for the picture, and the specimen. Yeah, but we'll talk about that. It's always the biggest snake. This was fascinating to me. being someone that likes snakes and studying populations of snakes, anytime you've ever studied, Rick will know about this and other people will study snakes, anytime you study any population of reptiles, you always find one gigantic one, which is always kind of fun. Yeah? And I think this is that rare moment where you go, what? How did this get so large? How did we never find it? How did it live near a road and it got run over that one day? How old is it? Things we never know. But what was good at the time was that, I got onto these guys and it was kept. Now when it came in, it was a pretty bad condition. The front half was run into the road. And because I really like this specimen, because I like ours. My dog that has a white tail tip, just so it's like that. I decided that, I was like, we need to do something to make this addict. Because I thought, if we have a massive death addict, any time snake guys come to the museum, they're going to ask to see this giant death addict, which is what's been happening. So I took it up to taxidermy, and the taxidermy lady said, leave it with me. And so she managed to stitch it all back together. She sewed its mouth shut, and then she stuffed it with cotton wool. And then we coiled it, and it looks okay, but it gives it life. So it's an amazing specimen. It's one of my favourites. It's in a bucket labelled Gigantic Adder. And any time people come to the museum, as when Rick came in, I said, you've got to see the giant adder. And when it came in, I made sure Glenn saw the giant adder. And Jodie saw the giant adder. Because I like the giant adder. Yeah. The other great thing about the giant adder is it was tissues, Sydney area tissues. We don't have many of that. The other thing is we thought, let's make sure the giant adder isn't something quite distinct. So we actually sequenced it and we compared it to another adder, and guess what? It was basically the same, but we thought, let's just do this because science, and we want to have some fun that day. But yeah, once again, another example of this quite an interesting specimen from an ecological point of view is, well, how did it get so big? Did it grow really fast, or is it 1,000 years old? We'll never know. But it's there, and because we've got it and it's cared for, someone can study it. This was another example that I put up for Mitch. There's Mitch. There we go. These are these people that message me all the time. So I got a dead snake, that's all. Mitch put up this thing and said, there's this Highland copper that got run over. And I said, okay, what a shot. Which is what I used to say. But I said, no, bring it in. Now, once again, another find where, Mitch, I think he was out doing work on these skinks. I think that was it. He's found a roadkill. Going, this could be interesting. Now, if you look at this snake, there's actually a lot going on here. So we've got a prey item hanging out. Why did it get run over that day? That's all the things I think about. But we got it in, it was a bit dusty there, coiled it up beautifully. And I think when I even fixed it, I think I even tissue sampled that she-oak skink too, because I went, well, it's a voucher too, it wasn't the best specimen. But yeah, it's just another fine example. This is all about how we're getting these animals in state salvage. And then my other sort of example I try to tell people all the time is, even though the snake got run over, now it's in the museum, it will live forever. At least longer than I will. This is just prime examples of some beautiful snakes. That's Stephen's band, a golden crown snake. These were both hit by cars, and I went and got them. But they're nice things like you would. Steve's band is a threatened snake. It'd be very hard to get permission to collect them. And I don't see, why would you? Number one, is it ethical, that sort of thing. But roadkill, it's already gone. Why not? And golden crown snake's another thing, quite common, but it gets more tissues into our collection. That's the thing about snakes. Now, we don't sort of encourage everyone to bring us snakes, but we're going to come out with a document shortly about that we're going to be distributing. And we're just waiting on some advice about that, about what the legalities and stuff, and what legalities of the museum are. So we are fully licensed to take the snakes and take them, but we have to ask some questions about how are they found and stuff like that. So just a few steps, but we're hoping to come up with a pamphlet that we may even put in the Courier. That's our study, that's what Jodie reckoned, about how you can contribute to the museum in a legal, ethical way. So that's what we're solely thinking about. So we had it ready tonight, but unfortunately I had to help her. Just kidding. The other thing that I'm going to talk about, because I'm forced to, but I really think this is amazing, is frog ID. If you've never heard of frog ID, I don't know what you're doing. Because Jodie, my boss, is an amazing lady, who knows how to sell science more than anyone I've met so far. Frog ID is this amazing citizen science, which is our new thing. I consider roadkill citizen science. Amazing app that you can download for free that has every single frog in Australia and most of the calls. Some we don't have, some we're starting to get. The main thing about this app is you record the frogs, you press send, and then they go up into this stratosphere, into the satellite, and then it beams them back down to the Australian Museum with people like Phil and Chris's wife. And all these people actually have to listen to them. And this is what they get, and our comical Jody that they put in there. Okay, so this is an insight into the backside of the inside of frog ideas. This is what the validators get. So the validators will receive this. They get anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 calls a week some days. It depends on the rain. And so they will get this thing, and basically every single call is listened to by verifiable experts. So all these people are just incredibly talented people that will listen to frog calls all day long, which I used to do till I sort of decided it was driving me mad. But yeah, it's verifying. And once again, it's like the thing of, I found this giant snake, but can you verify it? You have the phone and the stuff. And it's like, but what this has done with frogs, which is amazing, is these are verifiable frog calls. So there's a million uses for this that people are starting to learn. So let's say you are an environmental consultant, as I've been, and you've been asked to do a threatened frog survey. Well, the easiest way to do that would be to just go record the frogs, send it to the Australian Museum, and we'll send you back exactly what those frogs are from an expert level. And any really weird ones, they might actually contact you. There's been a few big surveys in Darwin done, just like that. Consultants just used frog ID because it was available to them. But yeah, amazing thing. Now the other thing about frog ID is it's exploding. From its start date, it just continues to go mental. Jodie works all day long on this. I don't know when she sleeps, 7 days a week on this. It's an amazing group of people. All the people really are so passionate about it because they're getting so many frog calls and it's so much data. Because it's basically data of where male frogs call all over Australia. And it's also helping us, find out where frogs are, how they're impacted, stuff like that. It's now being used to monitor bushfire recovery. And then the other thing that I get really excited about, that I listen to, and Chris Jolly's wife, is the Northern Territory, because the Northern Territory probably is one of the highest chances of us getting a frog that's undescribed. And I love opening up the Northern Territory ones, especially if they're from the middle of nowhere, because we have no idea what you can hear. And we have heard some stuff that we are not 100% sure what it is. Which is amazing, because then we can put those areas in and think about. But this thing has grown. There's now like 20 validators, I think, people that are listening to this on and off all day long, and the turnaround's not that bad. This was an older slide. I don't have the update, but just to give you an idea, as a map of Australia. So Frog ID has added 680,000 plus frog records to our knowledge of Australian frogs, based on a phone app. Now there was a lot of money put into developing this, but now it's basically all there, and the data keeps coming in. And as you can see, the data is slowly starting to come in for some bits in the NT and the Kimberley and North Queensland. Still huge expanses, but there's no roads. Like all good snake data and most published data, it's going to follow the roads. But we're starting to get amazing stuff, like all the ones Green Island and up on Tiwis and up on Coburg. It's just starting to get some amazing things. And people really love it. Like, the feedback we get that I hear through Jody or people is that this is like the greatest thing some people have done. They're just so excited that they can record frogs and hear them again. So I encourage people to do this. It's so easy to do, and you're helping to grow the knowledge of these species. And the other thing about frog idea that we often tell people is people think, but it's the same crinia over and over again. And yes, it is. But one day those crinia might never call again. But if I still had the slide, which I forgot to put the slide in, I now have a shelf at the museum of extinct frogs and skinks. And it's like this is the problem. Things are changing rapidly right now. The human expanse of the world has changed everything. Some things that we think are very common right now could disappear. And so at least if we start getting this data in now, no one will get this amazing data set of frog calls. And then lastly, the main thing that this frog call data has been used is to describe blue frogs. Jodie and her colleagues have done massive amounts of frog taxonomic work with molecular support, morphology, but they're often missing calls, because to get calls you've actually got to go out and find a frog. If you have a massive database of 680,000, probably 700,000 frog calls, you can go through it and find all these calls, and then you can actually use those calls to analyse them. Jodie's recent screaming tree frogs and stuff, some of the calls they use are citizen science calls, which is amazing. And I think when she contacted us, people were so excited that the call they made about that, that's actually the call that was made to of that species. So I can't talk about this enough. I think people need to get more into it. I think Jodie should come here and give a talk just on this, and we'll have a chat with her. She's just very busy, but it'll be a great talk. Now I'm getting to the end of my slides. As I said, I've been lucky to live up north for most of my life here. A lot of people, when they're young, often people go, I want to go to Darwin, I want to go up north, Well, up north is great, but here is fantastic, especially for someone like me, because I've never seen half this stuff. I was riveted, when I got some of these animals, especially a diamond python. I've never caught a diamond python. I found one, this is amazing. This is way better than the Darwin carpet. It's not as good as the jungle, but it's good in the red crown toadlets. New South Wales is also an amazing place, and I can see why people get really excited about their reptiles here. I'm slowly discovering them. I have no knowledge of these things. I'm surrounded in this room by people who have decades and lifetimes of experience. And as I slowly work on them at the museum, I'm slowly learning them every day because I'm getting bodies and stuff brought into me. This is my last slide. Thank you for dealing with me. I didn't even know I had this photo until I found it today. And that's one of my, just a nice classic Darwin photo. Walking around up the top, probably back in Noel or something, on a hot day. And one of my other favourite snakes up there, the Northern Territory pygmy mulga snake, that I've done a bit of work on, hoping to do some more work. That was a very neat little snake that I used to get a lot of on Dorak Road. Just a very beautiful little snake. It was unknown at the time. That's it. Happy to take a question if you've got one, or not.
Question. How quickly does the or how many animals are coming into the museum each year at a time? Did you get?
Well, it ranges on who's doing research. So for instance, this year we registered 2,200 lots of reptiles and amphibians. So that was what I found in the freezers. Also donations through unis. But you never know, like if if a professor retires, or we could get called out to pick up a massive collection. So like we've just finished catalogue Marion Anstis's collection, which is thousands of tadpoles. But it's just the time. But some days, like bi-weekly, I get things dropped off. We get parks, but it ranges. Like a couple of weeks ago, like you'll have people come talk to us, or there'll be some specimens. And then one day I got a phone call and said, "Can you come get a 400 kilo leatherback turtle off the beach at the Central Coast?" Which I did. But
What was it, sorry?
a 400 kilo leatherback.
Oh,
Yeah. So just you never know what's going to happen, but you sort of got a plan. Your day's going to change. The only thing I can plan is my visitors. I could shop today and Glen. And the other one's the other I could plan. I just have no idea what's going to happen every morning. But it's always fun.
And how many calls did you say will be?
Thousands. I think some weeks they've got 5,000 a week. Like it's phenomenal how many frog calls come in. Some people will submit every night, which is fantastic because there's this data set for just there's a couple of guys in the Northern Territory that submit every night. And even when there's no frogs calling, which is useful because it's like we have this data set from one guy submits every night, and it's just Yeah, and then the frogs start calling, and you get all the pulses, all the species, and then they stop calling.
I got called out to his house to collect the slaty that was eating his favourite green tree.
But you also get the other problem with the frog ID is NT, you'll get 12 species in a chorus. Yeah, so that usually starts with these emails that say help, for Jody to be a lot of help. Deal with this. Yeah, it's just a really amazing. I don't know how it got thought up. It's just amazing. It's just data. It's just data just flying into it. It's redesigned. Like they just put out a paper that's remapped every Australian frog much higher. That's what more you want. It's like if everyone could photograph every snake and use the data. Oh, got it.
What happened if the museum ran out of space for these specimens? Is that
Well, I've had some good chats with the old curator about this. Yeah. I have this thing, because I like snakes and I admire museum research, we now take everything that has data. I feel my role is to fill the museum with as much as I can, because I understand, I'm going to give a real quote from Rick in a second here, is that I have this feeling that with what if you don't know much about animal ethics and stuff aside, to touch or interfere with animals, you have to go through this process where you actually get a permit. It's called animal ethics, which you have to say, this is what I'm doing, this is why. This is getting more and more interesting and harder to do some research. Like you can't do some research that you used to be able to do. I have this feeling, and this is what Rick was saying earlier, I think there could one day be a day where you actually cannot do research on wild animals. And so where will you come and study animals? At the museum. Which means I'll need like 20 staff. But the other reason why we take lots of stuff is, and maybe Glenn will know a bit more about this, is we don't actually know how long these things last in a jar. So we have specimens from the 1860s, and some of them are beautifully preserved, some are terrible. It just depends on the preservation state. So if we're continually adding, at least the ones I put in, so the blue tongue I fixed last week, blue tongue from Sydney that came in perfect condition. I've got blue tongues from the 1860s, various state of degradation, but at least that one I might, in 300 to 400 years, at least there'll be some, so if all those are rotted or thrown out. It's like in the old museum register, I think Glenn calls it the big throw-out of 1921. Basically, the museum...
1914.
1914. So the museum said we need to assess, they went to all their jars, and unfortunately preserving animals was very basic. And they had jars, they would have jars of rotted snakes, they just threw them all out. That's what you do. We right now, we have a lot of space. We're slowly growing. I think we've just topped 1,300 eastern brown snakes, which I'm quite proud of. But we're slowly growing. But it's all about storage. So snakes are the easiest thing to store because they coil. And so you can put them in different stuff. Turtles go in bags, in dive bags, inside the main tanks. We don't get a lot of turtles. John used to use turtles. Probably the hardest thing to store are lizards, lots of lizards. Lizards are quite delicate, their tails break. And it's also how we prepare them with their little fingers spread out. They're sort of a bit more delicate. But we don't seem to have a problem right now. But I'd say that's the next generation's worry. We seem to have continual budget to buy formalin, ethanol, jars, drums. And then the tank store upgrade, we doubled our capacity for large specimens. Next. Go.
With the catch, mark, recapture work.
Yep.
I know a bit about turtles. I know how you do it with turtles, but how do you do it with snakes firstly? And then, has it ever been explored, like tattooing as a marking?
Yeah. So snakes, there's multiple ways. So snakes, they've done a lot of. So you've got ventral scales. You can cut them, you can scar them, and because there's so many, you can come up with a combination. So, 1, 5, 10, 20. Thanks, Ronnie. The other thing about snakes, if they're big snakes, is you can microchip them. and little snakes. You guys microchip broadheads? Yeah. So snakes take microchips pretty well. Lizards, there was one of the older ways to lizards is the finger toe clipping. That's sort of, I think, on its way out for ethical reasons. Even though there's been studies to show that it kind of has no impact, or it does have an impact. But the other thing I've always found with any mark recapture is the amount of animals you sometimes have to mark to get a recapture really lets you learn how many of these things, like the turtles, like I marked 1,500 epiduras.
For ethical reasons, wouldn't the drilling and notching be?
Well, that's still okay for the old turtles. Yeah, but maybe the next generation will have to microchip.
That's the tattooing thing.
Yeah. Tattooing, I've seen a process on geckos where you can inject a ultraviolet dye under their backs. And you could have like a dot would be hundreds, and so it's one of these things where it's continually evolving. Turtles, it seems to be okay to notch. They seem to be happy, but I think there's a maximum amount of notches, so you want to notch every scoot. It's sort of growing, but everything I've ever done, I did some microchip on pythons and we just never got a recapture. There were just too many on olive pythons, and there's just too many olive pythons, and we just never got to find another one. So there's just a waste of microchips. With some stuff, but stuff that doesn't move, you've got a better chance. Yep.
Do you guys in the museum do any sort of captive specimens, or is it you try to do it mainly wild specimens?
Unfortunately, these days, for us to keep a captive specimen is so ridiculous that we tend not to. It's also that the captive stuff, it's done. There's other people doing work on that. Like, number one, there's a whole group of keepers. Like I was a massive reptile keeper that are observing these animals doing that. The unis do a lot of captive stuff. We're more about specimens, yeah. But we also do a ton of ecological frog work right now.
Do you mean taking captive specimens into the collection?
Yeah.
Not anymore. These days we do not. Yeah, we don't bring anything live into the museum because it's against our current ethics, basically. Because that adds a whole other world of ethics of what do you do. Now, prior to all this, they used to have lots of pets at the Australian Museum, as previous curators and collection managers have told me.
Someone's got a pet snake that dies.
Yep.
Did you take it?
Thank you, Rick. That's a good story. Yes. Now, but we ideally are after specimens of known provenance. Okay, so in this case, these days, that might be stuff that you know where it came from. It was collected during an amnesty, or it's really rare and possibly the provenance is known. Like rough-scale pythons. So for instance, we don't have a rough-scale python in our collection. Our rough-scale pythons are bred in the hundreds every year. So anyone who has a dead rough-scale python, please get in contact with me, because we'll gladly have that. Because as Glenn told me, no one's ever studied the skull of a rough-scale python. So that's just waiting there. Yeah. But yeah, we do take lots of stuff. We will take stuff. We may not keep everything. We may just tissue sample stuff and dispose. But yeah, we tend to have a more of a yes, and then sort of deal with it when we get it. Because we find, it's like with parks, we were pretty picky, but then we just said, no, it's everything else. Yeah.